The galaxy was bleeding. Entire sectors lay in ruin as the Zarnathi swarm advanced, consuming planets like fuel. The Coalition, once a symbol of interstellar unity, now hung together by thin strands of protocol and desperation. Fleets that once symbolized pride were torn apart. Worlds long considered untouchable fell within days. Their defenses crumbled, their people vanished. Hope, if it still existed, was clinging to formality. A plea was issued, not to the strong, but to the available. Every member species, every recognized planet, was sent a singular message: assist or watch the collapse. Among those contacted was Earth, a fringe death world known more for its inhospitable ecosystem than its diplomacy. Their membership in the Coalition had been procedural, accepted decades ago under political pressure. No one expected much. Earth had never attended a military summit. Its envoys were rare, and even when they spoke, they were curt, clinical, difficult to read. In Coalition archives, Earth was labeled Category 7, a world riddled with seismic activity, dangerous fauna, unstable weather, and biochemical anomalies. Its gravity was slightly above galactic standard. Its atmosphere had traces of multiple respiratory irritants. Most species couldn't survive on its surface for more than an hour without assistance. Scholars noted Earth as an evolutionary anomaly, a planet where survival wasn't occasional but required. Despite that, the general view was dismissive. Uncivilized, barely out of planetary wars. One diplomat commented, "A planet where everything tries to kill you is no place to nurture strategy or compassion." When the call for aid was broadcast, the consensus was clear. Earth might send a relief convoy at best. Perhaps a few medics, some engineers, old freighters with supplies. The thought of military support never even crossed their minds. Behind closed doors, some laughed. They'll probably send motivational speeches and disaster response manuals. A Suroth admiral joked, Deathworlders might be good at surviving, but fighting an interstellar hive? That requires more than just grit. One planet under siege, Velar Prime, held the Coalition's last command post in the quadrant. Coalition Admiral Turek stood before a flickering map, watching red zones expand. Of their original 12 fleets, only 2 remain intact, and both were defensive units barely equipped to handle rearguard actions. Evacuation protocols were already in motion. They didn't expect salvation, only a slower defeat. Then, amidst the background noise of collapsing front, a ping. One of the communication officers straightened up. "We've received a response." They said. Turek frowned. "From whom?" "Earth." The Terran command. A low silence spread across the chamber. Earth? No one had expected that. A few glanced at each other, eyebrows raised. "Play the transmission," the Admiral ordered. The message began without ceremony. No diplomatic phrasing, no titles, no appeals to unity. A female voice, calm and direct, spoke in perfect galactic common. Request acknowledged. Reinforcements en route. Estimated arrival, 42 hours. That was it. No identification code, no command chain, no list of assets or units. Just a confirmation and a timer. Turek blinked. "Is that it?" "Affirmative, sir." No follow-up. The transmission was point-to-point, not on a secure diplomatic band. Military-level encryption, though, not standard Coalition formatting. The lack of detail sparked confusion. Reinforcements? What reinforcements? Earth had no declared battle fleets, no shipyards beyond their orbital stations. Their defense force was a planetary militia at best, equipped for asteroid patrol and local skirmishes. 42 hours? They couldn't even get a cruiser halfway across the sector in that time, without Class A drives. One officer suggested it was a bluff. Another proposed it was an old Earth military tradition, sending words of assurance regardless of capacity. A psychological tactic to maintain morale. But none of them knew for sure. Turek ordered the message archived and marked it non-critical. The battle against the Zarnathi would be won or lost long before any Earth vessel showed up. The Terrans would arrive too late, if at all, and likely with little to offer. What no one mentioned aloud was the subtle chill the message carried. There was something about the voice, precise Emotionless, surgical. Not dismissive, not aggressive, but cold, like the message had been delivered by someone who didn't care about sentiment or fear or even praise. Someone who had done this before. Someone who had seen worse. In the following hours, the war continued. Velar Prime's orbital ring was breached. Civilian transports fled with minimal escorts. Coalition ships did their best to hold the line, but losses mounted. There were no reinforcements, no volunteers, just radio silence and failure, until the second signal came. This one wasn't a message. It was a ping, dozens of pings, all appearing simultaneously on the outer edges of Coalition scanners. FDL shadows, massive and coordinated, moving in perfect sync. Coalition operators jumped to their terminals. Admiral Turk leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Can you identify the signatures?" The officer's hands moved rapidly over the console. Unknown configurations. No IFF. But wait, correction. Some matches to Earth orbital traffic records. Minimal data. Ships not cataloged in Coalition registry. Turek stared at the expanding markers on the holographic map. How many? The technician swallowed. 48 distinct hulls. Maybe more beyond sensor range. It's a formation. The Admiral straightened. Weapons? Hard to say. Scanners can't penetrate their hulls. But energy readings are substantial. Defensive layers suggest military-grade shielding. Multiple engine arrays. There's a lot of power in those ships, sir. Far more than any civilian convoy. A long pause fell across the room. The 42-hour countdown had expired precisely 5 minutes ago. No one laughed anymore. Another transmission came through. This one short-range, direct line. Again, the same voice. This is Terran Battle Group 17, requesting battlefield coordinates and hostile density maps. Deploying in 10. No introduction. No call sign exchange. No request for Coalition oversight. Just execution. Turk responded instinctively. Coalition command confirms. Sending coordinates. What kind of support are you offering? A pause. Then, termination. The line went dead. All eyes turned to the sensors as the fleet dropped from warp. What came next was unlike anything the Coalition had ever seen. The darkness in orbit above Velar Prime grew deeper as the first ships emerged from warp. They didn't shimmer into place like Coalition cruisers. They arrived with force, warping space with brutal precision, ignoring gravitational alignment, ignoring protocol. There were no gentle corrections, no stagger formations. The Terran fleet moved as one, like a predator circling in silence before the kill. Coalition sensors lit up red across every console. The ships were enormous, their heat signatures off the charts. Yet their engines ran cool, optimized beyond anything known. Their hulls were matte black, not for stealth, but to reduce reflectivity and tracking. No ornamentation, no display of color, no standard Coalition insignias. Instead, there were strange markings in old Terran script. Some bore emblems of wings, skulls, serpents entwined with iron. Names like Judgment, Iron Rain, Echo of Extinction scrolled across the ship's sides, etched in scorched metal. The largest ship, a carrier by mass, deployed stabilizers that rattled local sensors. It wasn't just armored, it was reinforced like a mobile fortress. Radiation plating wrapped its underbelly. Weapon bays lined its flanks. No diplomatic flags. No alliance banners. These ships weren't here to participate. They were here to end things. From the Coalition's tactical deck, Admiral Turek spoke quietly, as if volume might provoke them. "Are those dreadnoughts?" "No record of them on file," replied the scanning officer. "They're heavier than anything in our database. Estimated armor, classified beyond standard, multiple kinetic and plasma arrays. Sir, these aren't support vessels. They're siege platforms." Turek stared at the formation. They weren't bluffing. The human ships formed a silent perimeter. No calls, no requests, just motion. Small auxiliary craft attached and spread like a swarm, fast, surgical. Satellites, drones, recon pods. They mapped the entire conflict zone within minutes. From within the lead cruiser, another transmission came. Brief, unapologetic. Battlefield coordinates received. Initiating Phase 1 operations. On the surface of Vila Prime, where Coalition ground units fought a desperate retreat against the Zarnathi tide, the sky screamed. Terran drop pods pierced the atmosphere like artillery shells. They didn't slow down. They hit hard, landed fast, and from them rose a kind of soldiers the galaxy had only imagined in myth. Coalition troops watched in disbelief as the first human squads emerged from impact craters, clad in jet-black armor, enhanced by exoskeletal frameworks, and carrying modular weapons adapted for live-field transformation. Each Terran soldier was a walking weapons platform. One adjusted a shoulder rig and deployed a rotary plasma cannon. Another scanned the area using an ocular interface fused directly into their visor. No greetings, no hesitation. They moved in tight formation, clearing swaths of Zarnathi with surgical brutality. Coalition commanders tried to contact the human squads. The transmissions were acknowledged, but no dialogue followed. The humans didn't need coordination. They had already mapped every major threat vector and deployed accordingly. Where alien troops stalled under overwhelming numbers, Terrans advanced with mechanical certainty. They fought as if they knew the outcome. It became immediately clear they weren't just here to help. They were here to clean. Above, the Terran fleet began its own war. Instead of typical fleet maneuvering, angle flanks, protective wedges, fallback zones, Terran ships moved offensively, with intent. Human cruisers didn't defend, they pursued. One medium-sized battleship initiated a gravity lure maneuver, dragging two Zarnathi vessels into a trap zone before detonating a kinetic minefield. The debris spread out and cooled, perfectly coordinated to cover a retreating path. Coalition officers gasped. They're sacrificing ships. No, corrected a tactical observer. They're using them as weapons. The Terrans didn't waste. Every loss was calculated, every move purposeful. They disabled enemies, then obliterated them. Where the Zarnathi overwhelmed by numbers, the humans answered with terrifying precision. On the ground, the human squads deployed flamethrowers designed for hive organisms. The plasma was chemically bonded to stick to Zarnathi carapace, igniting layers of shell from the inside. Screams echoed across the valley. No prisoners. No negotiations. In one operation, a Terran unit known only as Squad Echo Black tunneled into a Zarnathi breeding nest and collapsed the entire structure using a series of shaped seismic charges. It caused a local quake, but the hive was gone. The humans emerged covered in soot unharmed, dragging data cores recovered from deep within enemy bionodes. The Zarnathi responded in force. Their main swarm descended, claw in the air, firing neurobolts. But it was too late. Humans had already adapted. Air support from Terran gunships circled overhead. Engines hummed with a low frequency meant to disrupt insectoid echolocation. Their weaponry wasn't just destructive. It was disruptive, built to cripple, to blind, to confuse. The largest of the Terran ships, later identified as a classless construct codenamed Oblivion, deployed what Coalition officers initially believed was a siege cannon. It was not. It was a gravitational spooler, an untested weapon theorized in Coalition labs but deemed too dangerous to pursue. The humans had built it, perfected it, and used it in open war. With a single pulse, the Zarnathi's rear fleet bent unnaturally before imploding into itself, ripped apart by unstable mass. The silence in the command room was total. Admiral Turek turned to his communications officer. Any casualties on their side? Minimal. 2 drop pod failures. 1 damaged carrier shield. No critical hits. He nodded slowly. What are they doing now? The officer scanned the feed again, securing perimeters, uploading threat assessments, requesting coordinates for next engagement zone. Turek sat back, stunned. They're not even waiting for a debrief? No, sir. They're moving like this is just one operation in a chain. Above the planet, the fleet continued its quiet dance. Efficient, brutal, precise. No fanfare, no posturing, just calculated fury. They didn't operate like the Coalition. They didn't ask permission. They didn't seek validation. They simply executed, adapted, and moved on. Even the Zarnathi, known for their single-minded aggression, began to recoil. Their formations broke for the first time in recorded history. They tried to regroup, failed. Tried to flank, failed. Tried to escape, failed again. The swarm had finally met something it couldn't consume. And for the first time since the war began, the battlefield was no longer drenched in panic. It was silent, with only the distant echo of orbital cannons and the low hum of Terran dropships returning to base. The aftermath of Velar Prime's liberation wasn't a celebration. It was an audit. Terran units didn't linger. They didn't pose for recognition, didn't wait for diplomatic handshakes. Within 12 hours of routing the Zarnathi, they had compiled threat profiles, indexed every known hive nest, recovered all viable intel, and loaded it into encrypted data nodes. Coalition officers attempted to open communication lines, to thank or debrief, but the Terrans had already moved. No long-winded briefings, no public statements, just results. Across the sector, command centers tried to catch up. Are they refusing dialogue? Admiral Turek asked, reviewing reports flowing in from subspace relays. No, sir. They're responding, but only with coordinates, confirmation requests, and deployment orders. Tactical only, not even minimal diplomatic exchange. They've acknowledged command tags. That's all. No conversation. Turek folded his arms. They're not interested in recognition. They're behaving like a Black Ops fleet, but they're not hiding. They want to be seen, but only the outcome. There were whispers among the Coalition ranks. Words passed in private. Some called them machines. Others ghosts. Myths. No one knew how Earth had developed such a force. No records. No budgetary allocations. The last military report on Terran capabilities had placed their primary fleet strength at defensive patrol class, barely above civilian escorts. Now, they were annihilating Zarnathi forces across 3 systems, and they weren't stopping. Every Terran action followed a pattern, precise timing, isolated elimination, efficient cleanup. It became clear they had been training for this long before the war began. Their fleets were not built in reaction. They were built in preparation. While the Coalition debated defense strategies and resource allocation, the Terrans had studied the Zarnathi, not just how to fight them, how to end them. They tracked hive signals, mapped behavioral deviations, recognized swarm breakpoints, exploited inter-nest communication failures. Their weapons weren't just powerful, they were targeted. Each unit designed for a specific enemy weakness. Kinetic rounds tuned to pierce bioshells. Sonic disruptors to overload the Zarnathi's hive resonance. Chem fogs that dissolve pheromone chains, collapsing enemy coordination. The Coalition's best minds had taken decades to theorize this kind of warfare. The Terrans had implemented it in weeks. The turning point came in the Malaran Drift. A system-wide fallback had already begun. The Coalition fleet, battered and fragmented, had initiated a tactical retreat from the region. The Zarnathi had moved in with overwhelming force, establishing new hives and blocking all hyperspace routes. Over 60 billion lives were at risk. Evacuation was no longer feasible. It was going to be a massacre. Then the Terrans jumped in. Not a dozen ships. Not a fleet. 3. 3 Terran vessels warped into a battle involving over 400 Zarnathi warforms. Coalition observers expected a scouting maneuver, a feint, maybe extraction for data recovery. But the Terran ships didn't flee. They didn't retreat. They attacked. The lead ship, designated Fall of Silence, deployed a spinal-mounted weapon that Coalition experts later struggled to categorize. Not plasma, not kinetic, not ion. It was a fusion pulse arc that destabilized the planetary magnetic field and weaponized it. Within minutes, Zarnathi cruisers were torn from the sky, their biohulls shredded by their own feedback loops. The second ship launched a gravity well disruptor, nullifying Zarnathi warp anchors. The swarm tried to retreat. It couldn't. It was locked in. The third ship simply deployed 30 Terran ground units. They didn't use standard dropships. They used orbital insertion pods that plummeted like meteors. Survivors on the surface said the pods screamed as they fell. Each one opened on impact, revealing troops encased in high-density armor exosuits, bristling with experimental tech. The swarm collapsed within hours. Coalition satellites recorded everything. The footage leaked across the network, first internally, then publicly. The galaxy watched as 3 ships, just 3, cleared a system that had already been declared lost. Civilizations across the stars began to ask the same question. How? Governments demanded answers. Analysts pored over the footage frame by frame. Yet there were no logs, no schematics, no blueprints. Earth had concealed everything. No trace of mass military mobilization. No public budgets. No export trails. No planetary chatter. How had they built a ghost fleet in silence? The answer came quietly, through intercepted fragments of Terran communication, encrypted, buried beneath layers of tactical code. Coalition analysts eventually cracked one minor key. The contents weren't technical. They were psychological. A simple message. Survival is not the end. Eradication is. The galaxy had misunderstood Earth. Everyone assumed Deathworlders fought to endure, to resist, to outlast. But the Terrans hadn't trained to survive the swarm. They had trained to destroy it. That's when the deeper truth emerged. The humans weren't new to extinction-class threats. Their own history was paved in it. Plagues, global wars, nuclear deadlocks, ecological collapse, technological singularities. They had faced them all. And each time, they didn't just rebuild. They adapted, hardened, improved. They didn't fear extinction. They engineered its reversal. When humanity joined the coalition, they didn't do it for protection. They did it to listen, to observe. They sat silent, learning alien battle doctrines, political structures, resource maps, and most importantly, emergency protocols. And then, without telling anyone, they prepared for the one outcome no one believed would happen: total collapse. The Deathworlders hadn't been idle. They had been planning for this, for the galaxy's failure. Back in the command chambers, coalition leaders began to shift strategies. Old fleets were recalled. Plans were restructured. The humans were no longer fringe observers. They were the spearhead. But coordination proved difficult. The Terrans still didn't respond to diplomatic overtures. Every coalition message was answered with brief, tactical clarity, never more than needed. Nevertheless, it became evident that they didn't want to lead. They wanted to finish. In private chambers, debates flared. One counselor asked, "Should we be afraid of them?" The response from Admiral Turek was sharp: "Only if we get in their way." Weeks passed, and the coalition's uneasy partnership with the Terrans deepened. It was no longer a relationship based on mutual goals. It was one of necessity. The galaxy had felt the weight of the Terran presence. It was undeniable. Zarnathi hives had been eradicated. Swarms that had once been unstoppable were now scattered, their remnants too disorganized to pose any significant threat. A quiet panic spread among other species. What if the Terrans turned their gaze elsewhere? And they did. The Terran fleet didn't wait for invitations. As the coalition reorganized and attempted to consolidate its forces, the Terran fleet quietly entered new sectors, uninvited and with no warning. They didn't ask for permission to engage enemy forces. They simply did. It was in the Gamorrean Belt that the final shift occurred. The belt was known as a lawless region, rich in unmined resources and home to dangerous pirate factions. Over the years, several military attempts have been made to restore order, but they had all failed. The pirates had the upper hand, using guerrilla tactics and rapid ship deployments to outmaneuver larger fleets. It was, by all measures, a lost cause, until the Terrans arrived. On the surface, the pirates didn't seem like much of a threat. They were a ragtag collection of scavengers, raiders, and mercenaries. Their ships were old, pieced together with salvage tech. They struck fast, retreated faster, and always avoided direct confrontation. But the Terrans knew better than to underestimate any enemy. They didn't just enter the Gamorrean Belt. They cut it off. The fleet entered with military precision. No fanfare, no warning. They simply surrounded the belt, blocking all exit points. cutting the pirates off from the rest of the galaxy. Their ships moved as one, no single formation, just a constant, crushing pressure. There was no negotiation, no demand for surrender. They didn't need to speak. They simply acted. The Terran forces deployed kinetic disruptors. The pirates' communications systems failed within moments. Pirate ships that had once moved with speed and grace were suddenly dead in space, floating helplessly as their engines were fried. Terran gunships, faster than anything the pirates had ever seen, hunted down escape pods before they could even make it past the first perimeter. The pirates fought back in desperation, but it was clear that they were no match for the human fleet's overwhelming superiority. For every pirate ship that fired back, 2 Terran ships returned fire with laser precision, taking out weapons arrays, shields, and engines in quick succession. The pirates weren't given a chance to retreat. They weren't given a chance to regroup. The Terrans weren't there to destroy them. They were there to erase them. The final assault was silent. No explosions, just a sudden absence of life. In the aftermath, no pirate fleet was left. Only the Terran ships remained, systematically ensuring the region was free of any threats. And when they left, there was nothing left to say. The pirates were gone. And the message was clear. The galaxy had underestimated Earth. The Terrans didn't negotiate. They didn't seek control. They simply wiped away whatever was in their way. This was the final step. The Coalition was beginning to realize that the Terrans weren't here to fight for them. They were here to fight on their behalf. But the price of their help wasn't peace. It wasn't harmony. It was control. The humans had a vision for the galaxy, and it was one that didn't rely on treaties, alliances, or diplomacy. It relied on dominance, not through oppression, but through forceful precision, through the understanding that war could be waged not for conquest, but for protection and annihilation if necessary. The last major move came in the Viri sector, home to several smaller, hostile species that had recently aligned themselves with the Zarnathi. The Viri had been a thorn in the side of the Coalition for decades, engaging in piracy and trade disruption. They had repeatedly launched skirmishes against Coalition outposts, destabilizing systems that had taken years to rebuild after the initial waves of Zarnathi invasions. The Viri had always been able to slip away, too quick, too erratic to catch. The Terrans weren't fooled. They didn't enter the Viri sector as a typical fleet. They didn't send a diplomatic envoy or strike a deal for cooperation. They simply appeared in orbit over the Viri homeworld, their ships filling the skies with a cold, inevitable presence. They didn't give a reason. They didn't give a warning. The Viri had no choice but to meet them on the ground. The Viri sent their best soldiers, their finest fighters, hoping to push the humans back. They didn't stand a chance. Human soldiers dropped from the skies with unrelenting force, deploying not just guns and explosives, but tools designed to take out entire infrastructure networks, communications towers, power grids, transportation systems, everything the Viri depended on to maintain their resistance. Every Viri strike group that attempted to engage the Terrans was dismantled with clinical precision. They weren't just fighting against soldiers. They were fighting against a systematic machine that understood them better than they understood themselves. The Viri tried their best. They called for reinforcements. They rallied their forces. They attacked with everything they had. But there was no victory in sight. The Terrans didn't stop. They didn't waver. Every movement was calculated. Every action was a response to 100 variables, 100 failures that the Viri couldn't anticipate. They didn't just eliminate the Viri soldiers. They disabled them. Terran tech overloaded their weapons, scrambled their command structures, and isolated their defenses. Within 24 hours, the Viri were in retreat, scattered across the sector. Their home world left a wasteland of broken systems and burnt-out structures. The Terrans didn't even leave a message. They didn't need to. Their actions had already spoken louder than any words. The final realization hit the Coalition leadership with brutal clarity. The Terrans weren't just another species in the galaxy. They weren't allies. They weren't allies with anyone. They were the final word. If you asked anyone in the galaxy who the strongest, most dangerous species were, most would point to the Zarnathi, to the Atrelians, the Saren, the Fenthri. But the truth was different. The Terrans had shown that they didn't just survive death worlds. They had learned how to create them. In a galaxy filled with ancient wars, forgotten empires, and thriving civilizations, the humans didn't fight for glory, honor, or territory. They fought to eliminate every threat that could harm their home, their people, their legacy. And in doing so, they had sent a message to the galaxy. We are the apex predator. And the galaxy would learn to fear them,